Lord Jesus Christ, live out in us in all that we are and have yet to become the full mystery of your death and resurrection. Help us to yield all by showing us and teaching us to welcome all, especially the dark guest in our soul. Stretch and to transform us by the power of your love, that we may find ourselves and see ourselves in you, in your beauty. Amen.
Amen.
Well, good morning. I am Andrew Cooley, a semi-retired priest. I live in the neighborhood, and this is the third or fourth time I've been here, so I feel like I'm the regular sub. I love being here. And especially I want to express gratitude to you and to Mother Maria for inviting me to be part of a significant day as we celebrate the Feast of St. Francis and also the end of a series or a season of creation. It's something that the Church has not always done well, and it's really fitting and wonderful that we do this for two reasons. First of all, to recognize what our place in the created order is something that is very much a part of our spirituality, of our what it means to be children of God, and in our relationship with God, that we are part of this wonderful world, and there is so much to celebrate. But I think it's also important that we have an opportunity. And then I'm going to take this opportunity maybe to say some hard things that our place in the created order may reflect something that we see in the parable from the gospel of the rich person who was caught up in greed and the abundance of possessions. To be quite honest, I find myself rather anxious and depressed as I think about the situation of the ecosphere, of the world in which we live, that even now they are continuing to find bodies from the destruction of the hurricane Helene that is evidence, I believe, of increasingly destructive hurricanes because of the warming of the oceans. That forest fires that ravage California and Canada and much of the West are very much in our mind, of increasing temperatures that are rising in the South. The melting of the polar ice caps and glaciers are all things to be very concerned about. I read a book recently called Life After Doom by Brian McLaren. I recommend that book cautiously. It is not an easy book to read. In that book, I read a phrase that I hadn't heard before called ecological overshoot. And it is the means by which we are consuming the resources of the world at a rate faster than can be naturally replenished and regenerated. And we think of our fisheries, our forests, our wetlands, being increasingly lost. These are important things for us to talk about as a community of faith, and how do we do that? But yet, when I think about these kinds of things, I find myself trapped in despair and depression, frozen sometimes in inaction. And so having a narrative, having a theology, having a way in which we understand the realities that we face and the heritage that we share is important. And I am one to say that I think St. Francis is certainly a resource and a gift that we need to embrace and celebrate. Another book that I read in preparation for today, again, is Richard Rohr's Eager to Love, the alternative way of St. Francis. And without any hesitation, I recommend that book to you. But one of the things that Richard Rohr says as we look at Francis is that we need to move beyond birdbath theology, the romanticizing of Francis and sort of isolating him out into the garden and not hearing perhaps the radical message that he has to say. Let me give you a little thumbnail recap. Perhaps you all know this, but to remind us, St. Francis was born in 1180 or 1181 in Italy. He was born into privilege and wealth. He had a wonderful upbringing, but was typical of the times. Cities often went to war against other cities, and in a war with, I think it was Padua, Francis was taken prisoner and was held as a prisoner of war for a year. It seems that something got planted in his consciousness during that time, not immediately upon his release, but he found himself maybe drawn to the renunciation of the wealth and privilege that he had, and in a rather dramatic break, he found himself standing in a public place, renouncing his ties to his father and his family's wealth, and taking off even the clothes, the rich, opulent clothes that he had, and standing naked in Assisi. And began to talk about poverty in a way that kind of romanticized it, even talking about poverty as his bride. Not long after that, he had a vision, and the vision was, the words came to him, Francis, rebuild my church, which has fallen into ruin. Now, he took that to mean the actual church building of San Domino, and he set about to restore the fallen down roof and the walls and clean it up and make it fit for use. But it wasn't long after that he began to realize that message wasn't simply about San Domino, but was also really about his whole message and the church writ large. He began to attract followers and to proclaim a message of restoration and renovation of one's theology. At the heart of his message was this theology, as Richard Rohr puts it, that the material is the doorway for the physical. In other words, that we see in the things around us, in the here and the now, the evidence that we need for God's presence and God's grace and God's goodness. God is right here and right now. And that was a radical departure from the message and the culture that the church had been steeped in for 1,200 years. That it was a message of that God is up in heaven, that God is surrounded by angels and full of glory, and the world in which we are living is a land beset by sin and fallenness, by corruption and death, and that the world is something we might hope to escape from if we say our prayers properly and get things just right. But Francis, maybe the epitome of this message was in the canticle of Brother Sun and Sister Moon. We sang excerpts from that in a metrical version as our opening hymn, hymn 400, All Creatures of Our God and King. And it is this wonderful outpouring of adoration and delight in all of God's creation, naming the sun and the moon and the winds and fire and water and the stars and the night, and how God is present in all creatures and in every living thing. That message came home to me in a vivid way. 5 years ago, I was living in Italy, and I had occasion, my wife and I took the occasion to go to Assisi on New Year's Eve 5 years ago, 2019. And as we came into Assisi, we found our lodging and then started walking around. And upon walking around, immediately we saw these manger scenes. The first ones we saw we had these life-size mannequins of the Holy Family and the manger, and they were around every corner on every street. And we saw some that were quite elaborate, and came to understand that Assisi is actually the home, the birthplace of the notion of the Christmas creche, the manger scene, or as they're known in Italy, presepio, or presepe. And a presepio in Assisi often are these elaborate displays that show not just the ubiquitous Holy Family, 3 magi, 1 shepherd, and an angel, and maybe a couple sheep, but in fact the whole village. All the merchants are there, kids chasing dogs, vendors selling various things, procession of the town elders. It is this elaborate display of people in their costume, in their clothing, in their setting of right here and right now. Not some Palestinian shepherd, but the people of Assisi, looking like the people of Assisi. And this notion that the incarnation is this celebration that God comes to us right here and right now where we are, that we see in this moment the goodness of God. You know, and that is really an echo of something that has been a fundamental, foundational part of my theology, actually ever since I was an undergraduate. You know, I grew up in the Episcopal Church, but was exposed to a pretty evangelical message of fallenness and the need for forgiveness and the holiness of God and the distance of God. But I remember as an undergraduate, at the church I was part of, a lecture series brought over John Macquarie, the great theologian from Oxford, who mentioned, I don't remember what he said, but I have now the book that I got 55 years ago, autographed by John Macquarie, The Principles of Christian Theology. That's a book I don't necessarily recommend unless you have insomnia. But nevertheless, there was something in it that just is really profound, and that was that it struck me so profoundly at the time. He said, though we talk about original sin, we need also to talk about original righteousness. The notion that the goodness that God saw when God created the heavens and the earth, that God saw what God created and declared it is very good, that goodness, that righteousness has not departed. That goodness and righteousness is still very much a part of all living things, of all created things of the world, and of each of us as well. And so it is important to recognize that original righteousness, that goodness of God, the incarnation that we celebrate is a recognition that God is present right here, right now, in you, in me, in every living thing, in all created things, that we have our eyes open to that. And I heard it again quite recently in a way that struck me profoundly, and that is from our recently retired provisional bishop, Melissa Skelton, in a sermon that she gave to the clergy during Holy Week, where she talked about that we are kin, we are related, we are kin to everything that is, and therefore our behavior towards all creation needs to reflect that. So how do we do that? There are some hard choices, some hard actions, some that we are called upon to do. How do we get out of being paralyzed and depressed about the situation that we're in? One of the ways, oddly or paradoxically, that I think is helpful, again, is from St. Francis. St. Francis gives us a way to begin to see into what we might think of as dark and depressing. And that is, you might note that we did not sing all 7 verses of the opening hymn. We would still be singing now, but the 6th verse, that one of the ones that we did not sing, is Francis' recognition that death itself is our companion. That death itself, gentle death is part of our experience, part of our nature, part of our inheritance, and part of the way by which we see God present. And so Francis uniquely was able to see in suffering and in death meaning that largely had been avoided by the church, that somehow, and so in Francis' poverty, that there was that. I was able to do a little slideshow during the Christian Ed time earlier today, and I talked about Francis. Paul Tillich said Francis is the father of the Renaissance, and how soon after, and particularly art inspired by Francis, we see human emotion being displayed in a way that hadn't been displayed before, and we see that in humanity. And so it's actually in the lower chapel at the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi that there is a painting by Giotto of the crucifixion that shows a dead Jesus on the cross, something that frankly had really not been depicted for 1,200 years. That was something that was to be avoided. But in fact, then we see in the death of Jesus a means by which we see our own journey. I open my prayer with a prayer that I try to pray every day and have done so for 25 years that has that phrase, live out in me and all that I am and have yet to become the full mystery of your death and resurrection. To see a pattern. And so part of the gift of living in this world in a way that we might make a difference is to recognize suffering. So there are maybe some actions and behaviors. I would say for every one of you is to take this seriously, but recognize the menu of options, the menu of actions that you are called upon to embrace may be different than your neighbor and may be different than me. But I know for me that living in a way that tries to honor the creation that I live in means that I make different choices about transportation and the use of fossil fuels. It means looking at my diet differently. Frankly, I have come to see that a plant-based menu is more sustainable to the earth than a menu that relies heavily upon red meat. That maybe the most dramatic thing that I've done is to choose to live in a multi-generational house. With my wife and I live with our daughter and son-in-law and their child in a way that has a more sustainable footprint. But I also do things that maybe open myself to more delight and more joy as well. I find myself in my retirement having both the time and now the proclivity to walk and to get outside. I've been walking lately on average about 30 miles a week. And I love just out in the neighborhood, seeing people's gardens and Friday, for instance, seeing a rainbow in a seemingly cloudless sky, seeing the seals frolicking in the bay, and finding a couple blackberries that were still edible. It's just wonderful to get out. But one of the things that I do as I go on walks, often in Point Defiance, is I've discovered a phenomenon that I didn't see when I lived in Colorado or much of the rest of the places I've lived, but it seems to be ubiquitous here in the Northwest where there is so much rain. And that is trees that years ago, generations ago, have been cut down or fallen down, that in the decaying wood of the tree or the tree stump emerges a new tree, new life. That out of these stumps, a new tree grows. And I find them to be an icon for how I am called upon to live my life. That I am that nursery stump. That my life, even as I am decaying somewhat, certainly as I'm aging, that maybe there is a way for me to my life offers sustainability and nurture and nutrients to certainly my grandson, but to all who might come after. It echoes to me the words that Chief Seattle is reported to have given to President Franklin in 1854. Seattle said, "Teach your children what we have taught our children, that the earth is our mother. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons and daughters of the earth. If we spit upon the ground, we spit upon ourselves. This we know, the earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. This we know, all things are connected like the blood which unites one family. All things are connected. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons and daughters of the earth. We did not weave the web of life. We are merely a strand in it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves." So with Francis as our companion, as Francis singing canticles to all creation around us, as Francis reminds us that we see God through the doorway of the material around us, let us take heart as to how we might live in a way that is both joyful and celebratory, but also honoring and sustainable to this earth. And so with that, I'm going to invite us into an exercise of being still and silent for a moment. And then I will call our attention back, don't worry, and we will continue with the creed. But until then, let us sit in silence and in the awareness that indeed God is right here, right now, in every breath that you take and in everything that you are surrounded by. Would you repeat these words? Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know